Good. Okay. I'm Hans. I'm an artist, trained engineer, and I've been asked whether I would like to chair this conversation this evening. I'm speaking so quietly because I'm not used to the microphone. So, well, thank you very much for coming. And you're in a space where there's a lot of kind of very interesting activities happening. One of it is dance. And the other thing is, of course, also existing and living, and I suppose sort of entering into internal spaces via sound, rhythm, touch, movement, you know, and really, in a way, training all your senses. And that, of course, that's what architecture is all about, is kind of responding and into relationship to space, and also kind of defines the way we exist, the way we think, the way we operate, whether we feel good, whether we feel bad, and all sorts of things. And dance, interesting enough, is kind of an activity that is pared down. You know, you just use the body, you use the person, you don't need any adornment, you don't need any clothes, you don't even need to see. So it's a very interesting kind of sort of a dialogue between this notion of makers responding to a building, making objects in some form, or responding to something that is sort of has a physical presence, but at the same time defines kind of our kind of existence, a being, a way of thinking. So this is the fourth event of called the Starting Point, and it's been initiated by a group of artists called 6040, which comprises of Tracy Rowledge, I can never call it David Clark, and Claire Toomey. And they have, each year they invite 3 makers or artists who are interested in kind of, or they think would be interesting, who would respond to this building and the environment and the space and the attitude of Siobhan Davis Dance Company. It's a 10-year program, so you will be seeing a few more. But I think tonight is very much about the 3 artists who will be in conversation with Sarah Wigglesworth, who is one of the collaborators with Siobhan Davis in creating this environment and space. And obviously she probably might elaborate more on this through the conversation. I'm not quite sure where it's going to go. But we have here Christensen, who has, well, she will be talking about her own work, so I won't say too much about it. And then Rhian Solomon and Fliss Quick, who are part of this 4th Starting Point series. So I'd like to hand over. I was told not to ask too many questions, so I will keep quiet for a bit and maybe enter the conversation as it goes along. So I'd like to hand over, and I don't know who would like to sort of start first with either asking questions or sort of elaborating.
Okay. I would like to be the first one to. I'd just like to say thank you to Sarah Wigglesworth for coming. We're really, really quite smug about having you here. And the 3 of us have had this quite scary and quite brilliant journey trying to respond to this building in 3 very, very different ways. And I think we're just grateful to have had this opportunity, and you are a very important person here. So it's a shame Sue couldn't be here. Siobhan Davis couldn't be here. She's downstairs. But we are really looking forward to asking you some hopefully interesting questions about our journey and about your practice. And so
I feel like I'm in the firing line here.
You're in the middle, but you're not supposed. You don't have to say anything.
No. Okay. I won't say anything.
Okay, then maybe I just kick it off. I'll just ask you. Could you maybe just elaborate very quickly how, when you were asked what kind of happened, I mean, what did happen in your head, your mind, what were your thoughts, and perhaps sort of explain or explore a little bit more how you sort of tackled the brief.
I was very pleased to be invited, but I was very, very nervous about accepting because I think I had 6-month-old twin babies and hadn't slept for a long time. But I just was it was very clear in my mind that this is absolutely an opportunity not to be missed. There are very, very few projects like these around. I'm quite a conventional silversmith, metalworker, and often everything I do end up evolving around costing and selling and developing a range of something to show somewhere, and there's very little gut feeling out of my comfort zone stuff going on in my practice, if I can use that word. So I didn't really want to do it because it's quite scary, but I knew I had to. So that was my initial
So what has
reaction.
changed?
Since that day.
Yeah, having done it.
Having done it, a lot has changed. I've learned a lot about my own limitations. It's been a quite a painful realization about my own practice, and I can give a couple of examples. I've felt that the building, the sort of the dance that happens here has this incredible humanness about it. It's very deliberately very awkward sometimes, and very free and uncontrolled. And I've looked at this, and I've looked at aspects of the architecture, and I've realized that my way of working and my approach to my work is incredibly controlled. It's not really allowing anything to chance, anything to improvisation, or it never just lets something be, which I think Sarah Wigglesworth has done in her architecture. She's let some things be in the building, which has been a very powerful experience for me to
But surely
observe.
you would have worked to a brief as well.
Absolutely, under cost, under time, and through other people as well, because normally building would be procured with multiple consultants and a contractor, so you're always working with other people and trying to work your ideas through others, and then you try to translate that to a builder who then has to build it as well. So it's always mediated through others, I think. And I think that brings its own discipline with it as well. But I mean, it's interesting what you say about letting the building kind of be, because I think about this building, when we found it, it was absolutely dilapidated. It was really disgusting, and that's a problem for lots of people because clients can't often see how it could be changed. And you're really into the vision thing very quickly at trying to get them to see what's good about it. And for me, the building was one of the things that's really good about this building is it's incredibly resonant in memory, because a lot of us have been in schools or environments a bit like this, or we know people who have, and I think that's a very strong and powerful tool. But also it's very forgiving in a way, because it's robust and you can bash it around and it still kind of retains something of its own identity, And I think the trick for us was to try and let that sense of identity come through, but at the same time as saying that it's actually now something very different, and it picks up on those memories and resonances of your childhood and school and all the rest of it, and authority and institutions and so on. But at the same time, it is something really different too. And I think that's a very difficult balance to strike. And I think, I mean, to be honest, I think sometimes with us that was a bit of luck, because actually downstairs where we bashed a lot of things out and left the trace of the stairs, and then we rendered over certain bits which were demolished. We wanted to cover all that up originally, and in the end the budget didn't allow it, so we just had to leave it. And actually, in a way, I'm really glad that the budget didn't allow it, because it did allow the building to just be itself, and that was a little bit of serendipity. And I think, you know, in the end, you just have got to learn to love those things, and that, you know, it's really, I think that's really interesting that it worked out like that. It's nice.
Can you say something about
yeah, come on, give me a break.
As we're just here, because I think you probably use the closest to in terms of architecture-related materials.
Yep,
you know,
I agree.
You choose. Can you say something about that? Why?
Why what? Sorry.
Those materials.
Of the specific pieces that I have made for this exhibition.
Yeah.
Well, it's really about walking into a space that you don't know anything about. I know nothing about Siobhan Davis or modern dance, contemporary dance, don't know anything about it. And I walked into this building and I was just hit by this wonderful bit that your budget didn't stretch to. And I was just so, it really made me happy that there are people who make buildings who can see that, who have such empathy and sensitivity in what they do, that they can understand that you need to allow these elements of the building to coexist with the new building, and for there to be a dialogue between what was there before and what has come. And it's this dialogue between those two elements which really, really hit me somewhere in my stomach. And that was what I wanted my work to be about. The two halves meeting, or the sort of the conversation that the building is having with itself. And I am normally a very precise, careful, thorough, possibly slightly boring silversmith who I'm very concerned with precision and with preciousness, and I couldn't apply any of this to this project. I had to forget about everything I'd done so far, and in order to allow myself to do that, I had to lose the control, and I told myself I can't go and choose a material and then make something with that material. I have to wait for something to appear. I have to find the stuff that I'm making, that I'm using, because that would be the only right thing to do. That would be the right way to respond to what I've seen in this building. So for many weeks, I had no idea what I was going to do, and it's pretty scary, and it's a very, very short time anyway to do this particular project. And when you are open, you see things and you find things, and I found these bits of concrete rubble which just felt right, because they were awkward and ugly and worth nothing, and I felt I have nothing to lose here. I don't have to live up to anything with this material. It's not expecting anything of me. I can work more freely than I've worked for a very long time. And so that was my starting point, and I then added some metal elements to it, which is perhaps representing the contemporary part of the building in a very, very simplistic way. So that both my pieces have the two halves. There's something crisp and sharp, perhaps, and something broken and crumbling. And there's a dialogue between the two halves. So it's a very, very immediate response to something I saw in this building.
Rhian, I've got a question for you. What I think is interesting about your work, I found intriguing, I've just seen it, is kind of that you're obviously using the body to kind of take imprints of a building.
Yep.
And normally, of course, dance happens not along the walls, it happens in a particular space. So can you say a bit more about sort of your thoughts and thinking process, maybe, how you got there, and how you used the building?
Okay, I think when I first came to the building, for myself also, it was the first time ever that I'd been in a contemporary dance environment. It wasn't something that I felt overly comfortable with, probably because I don't understand a lot about contemporary dance, or I didn't then. I couldn't personally see myself doing contemporary dance because I don't know how confident I feel about being completely free, sort of reflecting on something that Aina said about just letting yourself be. I work with skin quite a lot as a material, and when I came to the building, what I was quite struck by were the skins of the building, if you like. So there's hairs in the walls that are downstairs, and the pock marks that are like pores, and stairwells that are sort of knocked away, that are almost like sort of beautiful scars that move throughout the building. So I began to become interested in what the relationship was between the skins of people and also people themselves that use the building, and also the skins of the building. And you see a lot of sort of residue around the building of the impact that we make on the building itself, so scuffs and marks and things like that. But what impact does the building have on us? And sometimes I think that it's quite overlooked in other buildings, but here you can't overlook it. As soon as you kind of come through the doors, which are obviously double, and you're kind of closed into a completely different environment. And so I was really interested in reflecting the impact that the space itself has on people who use the space, whether it's people that work here or people that perform here. So the works came about where I was working with a person who was a dancer, but also an architect as well. And we came and visited the space on a number of occasions, and we're looking at holding sort of stances and doing movement around the space that allowed for David's body to lean into surfaces and textures. So he was collecting residues of these textures in his body, which we were then photographing, because obviously they're quite transient markings that are left there. My work downstairs is obviously a series of photographs that have picked up different impressions from places like the fire escape, or the perforations that you can see behind you, or the meshes on the stairwells. And I've tried to put the prints around the building so you're sort of reminded of these surfaces that are around you of the building, but also you can see them impressed into the body itself. So,
can I ask a question at this point? I don't know if that goes out of this. I'm quite interested in your material you do use is skin or flesh, and I wonder where does that stem from, or why? Yeah.
Okay. I'm interested in skin as a membrane between, obviously, us as people and the outside world. There's different reasons why I use skin. I'm interested in the materiality of it. I work quite a lot with plastic surgeons in other projects that I do, where we're looking at the differences between skin and cloth of our bodies. I'm also interested in skin as a canvas, so somewhere that kind of shows traces of different issues surrounding people's identities, their histories, their cultures, also their age. So I'm interested in lots of different ways, I guess.
Did you photograph the process of taking imprints? And
we filmed it.
Is it possible? Can one see those? Or?
I didn't put it on display. I was in two minds whether to exhibit it or not. And when it came to installing, I decided not to show the process behind it, because I felt that it took away from the ambiguity of not knowing where these impressions have come from until you catch a glimpse of the sideway or the wall or the grates along the floor. So I wanted that ambiguity to stay there and for people to almost explore the space themselves, as opposed to present it exactly as what we did.
I suppose it could have been interesting because I think architecture, when you think dance, you think space, big space. But actually to have a confined space and you can still do something, I think that's also, I suppose, could be interesting.
Were you having to kind of, I'm imagining you needed to get quite a lot of pressure on some, I would quite be interested to see the poses he was putting in order to, was he having to kind of pile all his weight onto one small part of his body in order to get the impressions?
What was quite interesting was obviously the different stances that he made depending on how much surface area of his body was making contact with how much of the material, depended on how concentrated the impressions were. So one of the prints downstairs has got an array of kind of impressions around the side of David's body, but you can see the different points of impact and the harshness of impact in some areas and the softness in others. He was probably sort of lying across the fire escape. We had him in lots of different sort of poses and positions throughout the building. And I think he was personally interested in the project because of his background in architecture as well.
And in terms of the selection process, I mean, how did you choose these? I mean, what made you choose these different types of textures or surfaces?
They were, depending on what the texture was, it was quite evocative of different experiences. So although the images portray the physical impact of the materials that actually made the impact created different feelings within the body. So the fire escape out here is made of perforated steel, which when you stand on it is really quite disturbing. And then you've got different grates and hairy walls downstairs that give different feedback. So I'm interested in really the feedback that materials give to the body and the experience of the space.
So you have to choose where you walk into, which part you walk into in the building, what market.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to reflect the various surfaces as well, because obviously there are so many different materials and textures within the building, and that's partly what my questioning will be about later for Sarah.
Can ask
in fact,
now.
I'll ask it now. All right. I'm interested in your choice of materials and how you select them to suggest an experience of a space.
That's a big one. Well, I think it probably starts with quite early on with a sort of an attempt to think about the building design conceptually, and try and orchestrate the conversations that are going on between various materials. So, for example, and I mean that's happening not just materially, but obviously spatially as well. So you think about the difference between a space like this, which is high up in the building, with a sort of removed aspect from the street outside, and say the foyer, which is where everyone's coming and going, and it's got a connection with the street. They're very different feelings and of space, and in a way I think that then the tale that you're telling around materials also elaborates something around that. And so if you take that as a dialectic for a kickoff, what we were trying to produce here was the idea of the brick walls of the existing building almost holding and sheltering a new thing which was growing out of that, like a cake in a tin. And that where the dancers were, it's a bit of a corny metaphor, but we kept thinking about how a dancer, just like an athlete, is somebody who is pushing their body to extreme lengths in one way or another, physically or stamina or whatever, and that somehow this space should be something which reflected that attempt to kind of defy the things which hold us down as beings, as sort of earthbound and sluggish and slothful and all the other things. So that we wanted this room to be very kind of light and billowy and open and, allowing light to play and dancing around and shifting and, sort of never static and all of those kinds of, really the very opposite of the kind of masonry architecture which held it down to the ground. And sort of from that came this idea about ribbons that were sort of moving and shifting and all the rest of it. And I think really in the end, the kind of decision to make the way the roof was clad eventually, and this was lined as a skin, as you rightly point out. They came through all sorts of other conversations that kind of get layered over that, like the fact that it was going to be used as a performance space, and we wanted, well, there were a whole number of issues, right? We wanted the whole thing to be one material, because that delineates the walls and roof from the floor, which is a very different kind of thing. That we wanted everything to be the same, because this is used as a backdrop, and the key is to elaborate the body and neutralize the backdrop. So, that wanted to kind of blend all into one, and it has to perform all sorts of acoustic, fire, all sorts of other criteria as well. And actually, in the end, be a very restful thing and a natural thing, and, really in the end, the plywood seemed to be a very good solution to all of those, challenges. But, I mean, it probably could have been many things. And, I mean, I'm not kind of purist in the sense that I think, it necessarily has to be this thing. Not for this, anyway. And I think, I don't know. Yeah, that's just the way it kind of worked out. Whereas like downstairs, I mean, I think that coming off the street and, meeting the building and kind of being introduced to this idea of the foyer with all its memories and layers and everything, it was really appropriate just to kind of let it be. And actually, I think we also wanted the foyer to be like an outdoor space, so you kind of walk in and it's still concrete, and you go out and it's still concrete, and then you're in the playground and it's kind of outdoors as well. And there's this sense of that you don't really get into the building until you've entered one of the rooms, So there's this kind of always this tension about where you kind of come to rest. And I think materials help you to say things like that, Yeah, and I think here there is a play, about indoor and outdoor, and that's quite nice. I mean, the way that when you go up the staircase, you're sort of represented with the rear elevation, but very, very close up, and I think that's quite nice. There's a sense of sort of, you're not quite sure if you're indoors yet, Yeah.
And it's the history of the building.
And it's the history of the building, of course.
It's so beautiful, that's how much rain and snow has been on those walls.
And how it's eroded the surfaces. And exactly.
And then they've become part of this very intimate space. It's quite a romantic idea, I feel.
Please. It's you next. You've chosen to go behind the scene a little bit, or use the kind of the more practical, everyday sort of activities, and the kind of offspin and thing to sort of work with. My question was more, was that orchestrated, or how did you go about it? I mean,
are you talking about the film or the
I'm talking about the film. The sounds, of course, they're sort of ongoing kind of thing.
The film came out of, I spent 3 days observing in there. Initially, I had wanted to create a performance for the office because I don't know if it was an intention when it was designed, but it felt to me like the office it's a stage as you walk in. It just is framed and it's a stage. And so I wanted to kind of highlight that there was a performance going on there. So I was going to do a performance. So I observed for 3 days in the office. And then I also was in conversation with Irish Chan here, who's a dance artist, and it was through our conversations and through these observations that I realised that actually doing the performance would be daft, because actually it's happening there already. And I wanted to highlight that to everybody. So in the film, was it orchestrated? Well, there were a few things that perhaps we had to film when there was no one else in the office. So I got Iris to do things like the main outdoor stuff, and I filmed her while she was doing these things. And then obviously I've edited it in order to choreograph the piece into a dance.
Yeah, I was just particularly thinking of the red shoes feet, you know, how they're
Oh yeah, well,
positioned,
that was stitched together through editing, so I just filmed
Okay.
her from while she was typing.
Yeah.
And she was moving her feet around, and then I've kind of cut out huge chunks so that she looks like she's dancing. Yeah, so it was a deliberate decision to make it like a stage. I wondered that, I didn't.
It was actually, yeah. I think we felt that the kind of admin side of things is often a bit neglected in a company, and that needed a little bit of celebration, and it's the heartbeat of the organisation in some ways. And it's quite interesting to turn that around and put that on display, whereas the studio, which is in a way the more public, you might immediately think it's the more public side of the building, you know, is actually hidden away right at the top, and you have to tiptoe to get in and take shoes off. You know, it's a bit sort of hands off, you know. So, yeah, and I mean, I think actually the kind of idea again came, I mean, it sounded like we're totally opportunistic as architects, and I think opportunism actually is a kind of really overlooked tool in architecture, because usually it's thought of as being, you know, incredibly kind of rigid and conceptual, but actually what happened to bring that about is really interesting, and you're not really aware of it, but really we're in two buildings here, and the sandwich in the middle that we eventually took out was the staircase. So that bit over there is dated 1898. This bit was finished in 1920. That bit had timber floors. This bit had concrete floors. And when we discussed how we were going to make the new dance, oh, by the way, there were slightly different levels as well. And actually their footprint isn't quite aligned either, but anyway, that's another issue. But when we talked about how we were going to make the new sprung floors, Sue said, there's no way I can have a different substrate. We'll feel it, and we won't be able to dance properly. It has to be the same. So at that point, we realized we had to cast a new floor. So we could make a new structure to hold this floor up. It needed beams and things anyway because of the way it was made. So at that point, we realized we could take out the wall that was on the side, on the right-hand side, as you come into the building, and replace it with the column, which is the new structure for the floor that we're sitting on now. Once we'd done that, then we could remove that wall, and that opened up the possibility of these glimpses and views and other things, like the change rooms, which eventually became pods, which just stuck in the wall. And, you know, that was a liberation, because suddenly you could transform the building from being these rather dumb brick walls into something which was much more permeable and you could play with. And, you know, it was just a great epiphany moment in the building design, you know, that we just sort of saw and grabbed because it meant that we could do other things.
But is that's probably not very common in architecture, that you're allowed to kind of let it grow as you go along, or is that common?
That you're allowed to
let it grow. I mean, it sounds like
grow.
Sort of, obviously you don't know until you open it what you find.
Tearing it apart. Right.
Well, I mean, in some ways, I think what we did was a bit willful, really. I mean, we could have left that wall in, you know, and not made a new column, but actually, I think at some points you just kind of decide you're going to be a bit daring and just push the boat out a little bit and think, you know, because actually it can just completely change the way you think about something for a moment. And I quite like that column. It's sort of crazy, you know, sort of on an angle, and I think what it allowed us to do made it all really worthwhile, because we just could see the building in a completely different way, and it opened up a whole set of other conversations. That was really nice. But I think, you know, part of the skill of an architect is in a way trying to spot those little moments, and it probably was more expensive to do it ultimately, but probably not a lot more expensive. And I think, you know, you're always weighing that up, you know, is it worth it? and how can we persuade people that it's worth it and all the rest of it. So, yeah.
Can I ask you something about that? On a grander scale, you talk about those sort of moments that's come to you and it's brilliant, and you can't make them happen. And I personally had this experience downstairs that it was a little wonderful moment, and I knew this was great. I was onto something exciting. And I just, on a more general level, maybe not about this building, but I'd just really like to hear if, throughout your career, if there's been some really, really specific moments that have made you kind of change the direction of your career permanently, that made you make decisions, sort of make you discover things about architecture or about yourself, where you have not really looked back.
Ooh, that's a big one.
No, it's a really small, simple question.
Absolutely, undoubtedly, and I think the moment was when I bought a site and built my own house with my husband, who is also an architect actually, and you know, in a way that completely was a watershed moment, because it was sort of no turning back. I mean, it was a sort of defining instant in my career, and I think there have been good aspects of it and bad aspects of it, but in a way, I think that project has sort of positioned me for better or worse ever since, yeah, undoubtedly.
So has it made you turn down certain projects because you felt, I've come to this point now and I can't do these types of projects?
No, I never turn down a project if it comes my way. Usually it doesn't come my way, or it turns me down.
Sorry.
Yeah, because I actually believe that any project is interesting, no matter how small or what the challenges are. You can always find something in it that is going to going to challenge you. You know, and it could be a budget, or it could be a client, or it could be a site, it could be the program, it could be all kinds of things. It could be a new technology you decide to use, you know, it doesn't matter. And I'm not snooty about the kind of work that we get. I can do,
no,
you know.
I wasn't suggesting that.
No, I mean, I think lots of architects are quite, you know, there's definitely a kind of pecking order in what people would like to design, but for me, I don't care. It doesn't matter at all. But, yeah.
So has it made you a different architect? I've seen the program. I saw you on TV. It's a really nice program. But how has it changed you that you built your own house and that it had so many exciting, innovative elements to it?
Well, I mean, I suppose, you know, at one level, it sort of defines me as, well, I think in architectural circles, you know, I'm kind of known as a maverick, and actually I really, really detest that title, because I think it's tantamount to saying you're an outsider, you know, you're you're a bit quirky, you're a bit different, you know, maybe to be kept on the margins, and I find that rather insulting in many ways, because I think that the kind of sensibility that we bring to architecture is absolutely applicable and, you know, worthwhile in every single project. And, you know, I'm ambitious for any kind of project, because I think, as I say, I think every project, you know, invites a kind of contribution to the debate, which is always really interesting. But, you know, and I think that, you know, it goes along. I mean, I think at one level, I'm not surprised that we're called Maverick, because I think what we've tried to do is show absolutely what can be possible in architecture as a very rich and tactile, spatial experience. And I think a lot of architects are quite scared of that sort of visceral and tactile world, you know. And I think the kind of reactions that you're talking about to the building today, I'm always surprised and delighted with. But I think, you know, the kind of intensity that you describe, I don't hear people saying that about other buildings very much. So, I mean, in a way, maybe, you know, that is the defining thing that we do, and if that's it, then so be it. And it will have strong reactions, and it will sort of cast us as something slightly different and all the rest of it. But in a way, you are what you are, and you can't really turn that back. I think, though, that has... I mean, I think Sue is a really unusual client, and, you know, and actually she commissioned us when we'd virtually built nothing. I hadn't even built this house I'm talking about. And so, you know, she's amazing, I think, in kind of helping a young architect to sort of develop themselves and to, you know, give them an opportunity to sort of draw them out. But I think a lot of people are quite scared by what we do, and a lot of work has not come our way as a result of that. Really, I do. And although I used to get quite upset about that, now I just think, well, you know, I am what I am, and if that's not what people want, then that's, sorry, you know, can't really help it. I'm not going to change my spots because, you know, it's not what the prevailing taste is all about.
Maybe what this building or this space sort of encapsulates is very much what architecture is really about. It's about people. Mm-hmm. You know, this is at the heart. This is about individuals, and they take off their clothes, they sweat, they smell, you know, exactly. They reveal themselves. Yeah. But at the same time, they retreat. And I think probably this is also what's maybe in some ways, you know, I think if you put the person at the center of the discussion as a human being, then you get a different discussion than you know, architecture or making objects or, you know, doing what you do. It's just one way that you know or feel you can sort of use to not express, but kind of maybe contribute to humanity, if you want, you know. So.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, architecture is about people ultimately, and I think that's one of the things that was unique about working on this project, is that, you know, it's two people talking to one another quite intensely for 10 years, you know, and coming up with a project where they're both very, very closely involved. You know, that's a very unique and precious thing to have, where, you know, because most architecture is actually produced by you know, architects working at an enormous distance from the client through project managers or other people who are essentially intent on trying to make the process as linear and as smooth as possible, and they don't want you to get heavily involved. There's no time and no money to do that. So this project is absolutely, you know, unique in that respect, really. It's quite extraordinary that it happened. And that Sue's commitment to the project was so intense and so involved. You know, it's really a privilege to work on a project like that, where the client is so heavily involved and really, really cares and, you know, wants the best for it. It's great. It's fantastic.
Why do you think other architects are fearful of making spaces that are tactile and are about people? Other architects.
Well, that's a really good question, and a very long question. I probably really haven't got time to talk about it now, but I mean, I think in the history of architecture, you know, in the move from being the maker, the master craftsman, to the intellect, which happens in the Renaissance, you know, what you get is a distancing and a kind of, and the idea that the architect can provide a kind of perfection. And I think everybody's always striving towards that perfect, sort of minimal, you know, sort of gorgeous, very, you know, well, yeah, perfect product, which, you know, doesn't have the marks of the human on it, like you're talking about in your work, and which doesn't show age, you know, which kind of captures the sun beautifully, but there are no people in the photograph. You know, it's all of those things, and it's a kind of mark of your control as an architect that it's as sort of simple and as pure as possible. And I don't really believe in any of that. You know, I'm interested in the everyday. I'm interested in the scuffs. I'm interested in the age. I'm interested in, you know, the weathering. I'm interested in all of those things. You know, they are the stuff of architecture.
Anyway, that's
yeah,
part of
exactly. And you've got to learn to love that, else you start hating your building the moment you hand it over.
Yeah.
You know, it's on a downward path from then on. Actually, I think buildings get better with age on the whole. You know. And that's what's lovely to work in a building like this, because it's an old building and it's got the marks of time and, you know, all of those things which kind of are very, they're just lovely about those things. And you don't want to clean them and get rid of it all. It's just, you know, it's great. But I think that's not the prevailing thing. So I think that's the kind of conversation that architects are in at the moment. Sorry, I'm dominating this conversation.
No, maybe they don't like people. I don't know. Okay, I mean, are there any questions from the audience? I don't know whether you've seen it, whether you've seen the work, I hope you have, or anything that sort of just you feel you would like to, say. You don't have to ask a question, you can say something.
I have a question again, sorry.
Yeah.
Is that unless I don't want to take the floor if someone else has a question. But, I was interested because, Amy, you'd kind of feel like this work has been a departure for you, and I read that to mean you've taken some risks, and I'm kind of keen to know what the next one is going to be.
Well, I'm going to not take some risks for a little while. Okay. I'm going to stay right here where I've finished now. No, I feel that I have, in the last couple of months, I've realised things about my own work, and I'm very excited about trying to apply my discoveries to a body of work, and I don't feel like I'm ready to fight something. I feel like I'm going to settle and be thorough and think about things for quite a long time.
It's quite risky, isn't it?
Is that risky thinking? And I'm trying really hard not to plan anything. I've no idea what's going to happen, or when anything's going to happen, because I have spent 13 years being a silversmith with a very sort of structured approach, and I want to do something different now. So
is that a turning point since working here that you feel you want to do that?
It's been a slow cooking thing, and I've had 3 children. This is not really relevant, but I have had 3 children in the last 5 years, and in those 5 years, things have been. When you have something else in your life that is very, very time-consuming and important, sometimes silversmithing has suddenly, for the first time in my life, seemed like not that important, actually. There are other things. So I've sort of, that thought has crept in slowly the last couple of years, you know. And I sort of started doubting everything I'd been doing until now. I doubted my material, I doubted silver as a material, and I think the recession has also made lots of people doubt it. The preciousness has become just irrelevant, and the perfection or the perfectly polished surface, it's like the architecture you're talking about. As soon as you get a scratch, there's a scratch. You've got to polish it, it's a scratch. And it's like, it feels hollow now. And for many years it wasn't hollow for me, but I guess maybe I'm growing up or something. But
I don't.
Maybe I'm going backwards.
Don't grow up.
I don't know. I just have I have a gut feeling that I need to let things be and.
But it sounds that is a good place to be. I mean, it might be an unsettling place to be, but I think, you know, it sounds pretty amazing if this, to realize that. You know, some people don't realize this. And I think to actually be able to recognize that this is happening.
Also, when you said that when you started this project, you were really scared, you said that twice, and I'm wondering whether you still feel scared about the same things that you felt scared of at the beginning, or have you sort of expunged those demons now? Or are there always scary things when you're addressing something new? Because you asked me about kind of, is there a defining moment in my practice, and in a way I'm asking you the same kind of question in return, I suppose, whether you still feel scared.
I'm not generally a scared person, but I think I just want to emphasize that there is an element of terror when people whose work you really admire and respect ask you to do something.
Yeah.
And invite you to do something which is in a public space. But if there wasn't that, then it would be not important.
Yeah.
So it was a very excited fear. I think it's not fear. It's just being aware that this is important. This is something I really mustn't. I mustn't waste this opportunity, or I mustn't let it sort of slip and not do it properly. That was just this understanding the importance of it.
So do you feel a different kind of silversmith now than you did at the beginning?
I think so. I haven't been this new silversmith for very long, but maybe. I was looking at the Goldsmiths Fair invitation. I don't know if any of you are aware of it. Of course. I mean, it's Goldsmiths Fair is an annual exhibition for silversmiths and jewellers where we all make and sell our work to the public. And it's a very traditional environment, and it's a very precious work. And I looked at the invitation and I thought, I have shown there, I think 8 times, and I thought, this has nothing to do with me. I don't want to go and see the show. I don't know if I can ever apply to do the show again. And I don't care, I'm not interested. And I just felt very strongly that made me realize that I had moved myself a bit. Because a year ago I would have, great, that's exciting, and I'll go and do that. So
that's interesting.
It may be that in order to move oneself, you have to overreact, and then you settle somewhere that isn't quite as extreme as that. But yeah.
How has similar things occurred in your life?
I think making's always at the heart of everything, pretty much, that I do. I love learning through making, but I'm at a stage in my work at the moment where I'm looking to kind of migrate from physically doing to actually kind of writing and researching into making and the value of making and materials to sort of communicate across disciplines. So I don't think that I'm going to completely kind of put the making down, but at the moment I'm considering moving in that direction where making will still be at the heart of it, but I won't be actually doing physically. I don't know.
Is that as the result of this project, or it just happens to coincide with?
I think it's been cooking away. Yeah, for a little bit. I've always loved to kind of research through objects, so using objects or making objects that allow me to learn and engage with other people. Yeah, so I think it's been ongoing.
But you've answered my question that I was going to ask you about. I'm going to ask both of you about what place you give making, hands-on, physical, dirty fingers making in your practice, and you've answered that really, but Fliss, you haven't answered it.
Do you mean the kind of traditional skills making?
Yeah. because we've worked alongside each other on this project, and it's, I always assume people work like I work, and we have worked so very differently. It's been very interesting to observe two other people. The approach we have the same invitation and the same building, and it's just been brilliant to learn how differently people approach things. And tell me about your making. Are you a maker or are you
I would say that you know, my work is traditionally, it's grounded in the traditional making. Obviously, for this 60/40 starting point series, I've done something very different. It felt like a great opportunity to kind of have a conversation with the building, and I wasn't sure of necessarily making another series of office jewellery, which is what I've previously done, would work in this. I would be repeating myself.
But is jewellery important? Are you excited about jewellery, or is it just a way to involve people? Is it the people?
Yeah, I know that when there's this conversation about why I'm so interested in people, why I work as a protagonist, why my work's always about people, but I love people, and I love watching people, and that's obviously a big part of my work, but I think it's more about, it's about people in the world that they create and how we view the world, and kind of making choices about how we, what am I trying to say? It's about finding new ways to view the world. Or so downstairs, I've kind of wanted to turn things on the head so that people are now seeing the office as a dance stage. So it's not necessarily about the people themselves, but about what we think. If that makes sense.
Well, jewellery wouldn't exist without people, would it?
Maybe.
I don't think so. I think it needs the person. I mean, I think that maybe what I think is really interesting about this dialogue is that it's really about an exchange, a conversation. It is about that you can either have with yourself or somebody else.
Can I just interrupt, because that leads into kind of a question or a kind of a reflection of how I feel about the conversation this evening. And being one of 60/40, the 60/40 group, we've always seen this opportunity that Sue so generously handed to us as an opportunity to respond to the creative movement in the building and, you know, the architecture that Sarah's created. And actually, it's not a response to, it's a collaboration. You were saying, Sarah, you were speaking about your relationship with Sue. It was a collaboration.
It was, yeah.
And when each of you has spoken, you haven't responded to, you've collaborated with the building. And that's been quite a sort of a huge shift in my mind about how I feel about the Starting Point series. And that's how I feel about all my commissions in a way, is that I am the client is allowing me to collaborate with she, to create my next piece of work. And I think that's what you've all done, to create what you've created.
Yeah, you exchange ideas, isn't it? It's a response. I mean, in a way, it's a kind of a strange thing to create object in a space, in an activity where you want to take everything off. You don't want anything. You don't wear jewelry. On the contrary, you strip yourself almost to nothing. And of course, I find this intriguing in terms of the kind of imprint, of the body imprint, of creating textures and patterns. You know, and if you look at sports, you know, you have to have nothing on really in order to, and even then you're still. And a sense of orientation, you don't, you know. But I thought, you know, maybe that's now something which I've been thinking, researching is less in response to the kind of work, but much more kind of how it could influence, how could objects or things influence dance or interact with dance, because you know you have a clear space, so you can move depending on how, you know, a bit like bats in a way. There's a sound and then you sort of orientate yourself. You know, would that be disrupted? You know, could you redirect? You know, could you not reinvent dance? You can't reinvent dance, but I think could there be something where there is a need for physical things in order to perhaps through sound, through space, through how we feel, navigate or create new or different movements that's I also felt interesting when you're saying you squeeze in the idea that actually you need the architecture to do it, because without the architecture, because it needs to be structural, you can't do it unless you of course press your body against it or you run against it. But you still have to make a choice, you know, whether you're pressing against this corner, this corner, this corner. And the building can't tell you what it feels, you know. So anyway, I think we should maybe bring it to a close. I would like to thank the audience for listening and participating and thinking along with the conversation, and obviously the artists and Sarah and Sean Davis and representative of 6040 for making this happen.
And thank you to Hans.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Yeah.